sorry, everyone, before I was singing this, Marshmallow Shockwave song. Nice song, you know. Well, let's be reading new Alex Rider's book 7. It's called Snakehead. The chapter is called Spare Parts, and it's also called Chapter 17 at page 1296. The plane was a two-seater. Piper, P-A. Piper, P-A. P-A. Piper, P-A. Piper, P-A. 18. Piper, P-A. 18150. Super Cub, with a top speed of just 130 miles an hour. But Alex had been told that they wouldn't be travelling very far. He was sitting behind the pilot in the cramped cockpit with the buzz of a propeller, wiping out any chance of conversation. Not that Alex had anything to talk about. His wrists and ankles were shackled. The seatbelt had been fastened in such a way that he couldn't reach the release buckle. He wondered briefly about the balding, red-necked man in front of him, paid to carry a boy to an unspeakable death. Was he married? Did he have children of his own? Alex considered trying to bribe him. ASIS might pay $20,000 for his safe return, but he never even got a chance. He never even got a chance. The pilot only glanced at him once, revealing his black sunglasses and a blank face, then put on headphones. Alex guessed he would have chosen carefully. Like you wasn't going to make any more mistakes. But his worst mistake had already been made. He had the left watch on Alex's wrist. The same watch that was even now surely sending out a distress signal to MI6. It had to be. Alex surely it had to be. Alex knew that without this one hope, if he didn't believe that despite everything he still had the advantage, he would be paralyzed with fear. Major Lee's plan for him was the most evil thing he had ever heard, turning him from a human being into a bag of spare parts. I should certainly be right about the Snakehead, and maybe Alex should have listened to his warnings. These people were death itself, and yet Alex had been locked up at Youth's house throughout the night, and for much of the morning. It was now almost midday. How long had it been since you had begun sending the signal? 16 hours at the very least. Maybe longer. MI6 would have received the signal in Bangkok. It would take them time to reach Australia. Surely they would be tracking him even now, watching him every inch of the way as he moved eastwards. But Alex had to force himself to ignore the little voice in his ear that told him they should have been here by now. Perhaps they had decided not to bother. After all, he had called them once before when he had been prisoner in Point Blanc Academy. That time the panic button had been concealed in a GPS receiver. He pressed it and they had done nothing. Was it happening again? Don't go there. They would come. He had no idea where they were heading, and the pilot's body was effectively blocking out the compass and any of the other controls which might have given him a clue. He had assumed at first that they would stick to the coast. After all, the plane had no wheels. It had to land on water, but for the last hour they had been flying inland, and only the position of the sun gave him an idea of the direction. He looked out the window past the blur of the propeller. The landscape was flat and rocky, covered in scrub. A brilliant blue river snakehead. A brilliant blue river snaked down like a great crack in the surface of the world. Wherever this was, it was huge and empty. There were no sign of any roads, no houses, nothing. He tried to make out more of the pilot's features, but the man's eyes were fixed on the controls, as if he were making a deliberate effort to ignore his passenger. He pulled on the joystick and Alex leant to one side as the plane dipped. Now he saw a common green, a band of rainforests. In year 4, I've been learning about rainforests today. Today's Friday, and I'm in year 4, and I'm 8. My name is, can't tell you, but we've been studying about rainforests nowadays with somebody called my teacher. But anyway, just carry on. Where are we? About the rainforests. You had spoken of the Australian jungle. Was this what he had meant? The plane dipped down. Alex had been in rainforests before and recognised the extraordinary chaos of leaves and vines. 1,000 different shades and sizes, each one of them endlessly fighting for a place in the sun. Surely there would be somewhere for them to land here, but then they flew over the edge of the canopy, and Alex saw a clearing river and a river that swelled suddenly into a lake with a cluster of buildings around the edge, and a jetty reaching out to welcome them. "We're landing," the pilot said for no obvious reason. It was the first time he had spoken throughout the flight. Alex felt his stomach shrink, and his ears popped as they circled round and began their descent. The sound of the engine rose as they neared the surface of the water. They touched down, sending spray in 2 directions. And Osprey, frightened by a sudden arrival, leapt out of the undergrowth in panic of beating wings. The pilot brought the plane round and they headed smoothly towards the jetty. 2 Aboriginal men had come out. They were both muscular, unsmiling, dressed in dirty jeans and string vests. One of them had a rifle slung over his bare shoulder. The pilot cut the engine and opened the door. He had unhooked a paddle from the side wall of the cockpit and used it to shear steer their plane the last few meters. The 2 men helped tie it into the jetty. One of them opened the door and released Alex from the seat. Nobody spoke. That was perhaps more unnerving than anything else. Alex took a look around him. The compound was clean and well ordered with neat flower beds. The lawns that had recently been mown. All the buildings were made of wood, painted white with low roofs stretching out over long verandas. There were 4 houses, square and compact, with open shutters and fans turning within. Each of them had a balcony on the first floor, with views down to the lake. One of the buildings was an office and administration centre, connected to a metal radio tower with 2 satellite dishes. There was a water tower and an electric generator with a fence running round it, topped with razor wire. The last building was the hospital itself, long and narrow. The hospital itself, long and narrow. with a row of windows covered in mosquito nets, and a red cross painted on the front door. This was where Alex would be sent when the time came. Not once, but again and again, until there was nothing left of him. The thought made him shiver, despite the damp heat of the afternoon. Alex turned his head away. At first sight, there didn't seem to be too much security. But then Alex noticed a second fence, this one on the edge of the compound, and about 10 meters high. About 10 meters high. It was painted green to blend in with the forest beyond. There were no boats moored to the jetty and no sign of a boathouse. So the escape downriver would be impossible unless he swam. Stop that, brother. It's okay. I'm okay. Why? I'm recording. Sorry. Right, sorry about my brother. Let's carry on. There were no boats moored to the jetty, and no sign of any boathouse. So an escape downriver would be impossible too, unless he swam. And what would be the point of breaking out of here? He had seen from the plane. He was in the middle of the ambush with nowhere to go. Two guards had each clamped a hold of it now, and now they led him towards the administration building. As they reached the door, a young woman appeared, dressed as a nurse. She was short, plump, and blonde. She had on bright red lipstick, which seemed strangely at odds with her starched white uniform. One of the stockings was studded. "You must be Alex," she said. "I'm Nurse Hicks, but you can call me Charlene." Alex had never heard such a broad Australian accent, and what the woman was saying was simply crazy. She was welcoming him as if he might be actually glad to be here. "Come straight in," she continued. Then she noticed the cuffs. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" she exclaimed in full of indignation. "You know we don't need those here, Jacko. Will you please remove them?" One of the men produced the key and freed Alex's hand. The nurse touched it at them, then opened the door. And led Alex down a corridor that was clean and simple, with rush matting and whitewashed walls. Fans were turning overhead, and there was music playing somewhere. A Mozart opera. "The doc will see you now," the nurse said, cheerfully, as if Alex had booked an appointment weeks ago. There was another door at the far end, and they went through. Alex found himself in a sunny, sparsely furnished room, little more than desk and two chairs. There was a screen to one side, and a small fridge and a trolley with some bottles. A stethoscope and two scalpels. The window was open with a view of the jetty. A man was sitting behind the desk, dressed not in a white coat, but jeans and a brightly coloured open-necked shirt with sleeves rolled up. He was in his 40s, thick blonde hair and a craggy, weather-beaten face. He didn't look like a doctor. He hadn't shaved for a couple of days, and his hands were grubby. There was a glass of beer on his desk and an ashtray filled with butts. "Good day, Alex. Good day, Alex." He spoke with an Australian accent. "Take a seat." It was an invitation. It wasn't an invitation. It was a command. I'm Bill Tanner. We're going to be seeing a lot of each other over the next few weeks, so I might as well get a few things clear from the start. Fancy a beer? No, Alex replied. You'd better drink something anyway, the nurse said. You'd better drink something anyway, the nurse said. You don't want to get dehydrated. She went over to the fridge to go and produce a bottle of mineral water. Alex didn't touch it. He had already decided he wasn't going to play with these people. How was the flight? Tanner asked. How's the flight? Tanner asked. Alex didn't answer. The doctor shrugged. You're feeling sore. That's okay. I'd be pretty sure if I were in your shoes. But maybe you should have thought about the consequences before you took on the Snakehead. He leaned forward, and Alex knew with a sense of revolution that he'd had this conversation many times before. Alex wasn't the first person to be brought unwilling to the secret hospital. Alex had sat right where he was sitting right now. He was sitting down. Let me tell this how this works, Dr. Tanner began. You're going to die. I'm sorry I have to tell you that, but you might as well get used to it. We all have to die sometime, although for you it's probably a little sooner than expected. But you have to look on the upside. You're going to be well looked after. We have a really qualified team here, as it's in our interest to keep you going as long as possible. You're going to have a lot of surgery, Alex. There's some bad days ahead, but you'll come through. I know you will. We'll help you finish the line. Alex glanced briefly at the trolley, measuring the distance between himself and the scalpels. The distance between himself and the scalpels. He thought about making a grab for one of them, using it as a weapon, but that wouldn't help him. Better to take it with him to find a use for it later. He realized that the doctor was waiting for him to reply. He answered with a single ugly swear word. Tanner just smiled. Your language is a little ripe, son. He said, but that's no worries. I've heard it all the time before. He just out the window. Now you're probably wondering how you can escape from here. You've seen the fence and you're thinking you can climb over it, or maybe you looked at the river and decided you can try swimming. It all looks pretty easy, doesn't it? No CCTV cameras, just 7 of us in the compound. Me, 4 nurses, and Jacko and Crombie. Not much security. That's what you're thinking. But I'm sorry to tell you, mate. You're wrong. You go at night, and you'll have to reckon with Jacko's pit bull. His name is Spike, and he's a nasty piece of work. He'll rip you apart as soon as he look at you. As for the fence, it's electrified. Touch it, and it'll take you a week to wake up. And you're not getting anywhere near the generator, not unless you know how to bite your way through razor wire, so you can forget about tampering with the current. And even if you didn't manage to get out, it wouldn't do you much good. We're on the edge of the Kakadu National Park, 2,000 million years old, and as bad as the world was when it started and when it began. The start of Arnhem Land is about a mile from here. But that's a mile of tropical rainforest, and you'll never find your way through. Assuming there's a death adder or King Brown didn't get you. There are spiders, wasps, stinging nettles, biting ants are waiting for you on the other side. Saltwater crocodiles. He jacked a thumb. There are hundreds of ways to die out there, and all of them are more painful than anything we've got lined up for you here. That leaves the rear. Looks pretty tempting, doesn't it? Well, there are no boats here, no canoes or kayaks or rafts or anything else you can get your hands on. We even keep the coffins locked up after one guy tries to burst out in one of those. You remember that, Charlene? The nurse laughed. He was using the slit as a paddle. But he didn't get very far, Alex, and nor would you, because this is a pre-monsoon season. were the aboriginals called Ganumalang. The water's swollen and fast moving. About 10 minutes down the river, you'll hit the first rapids, and after that, it'll just get worse and worse. You try to swim, you'll get cut to pieces on the rocks. You'll almost certainly drown first, and wait for you a mile downstream are the Bore Falls, a 50-meter drop with a ton of water crashing down every minute. So do you get what I'm saying? You're stuck in, mate, and that's that. Alex said nothing, but he was storing away everything Tanner was telling him. It was just possible that the doctor was giving away more than he realised. Outside, he heard a sudden wiring. The engine of a Piper had started it again. He glanced out and saw the seaplane moving away from the jetty, preparing to take off. We're not going to lock you up, Alex, Tanner went on. The grub's good, and if you want a beer, you can just help yourself. There's no TV, but you can listen to the radio. I think we've got a few books. Point is right now. Is that right now? You're here as our guest. Soon, you'll be here as our patient. And after we've begun work, you won't be going anywhere. But until then, I want you to take it easy. We have to watch your blood pressure. We have to watch your blood pressure. The nurse muttered. That's right. And now, if you don't mind, I would like to roll up your sleeve so I can take a blood sample. Doesn't matter which arm. I also want a urine sample. It looked to me you're pretty fit, but I don't need it all down on the computer. Alex didn't move. It's your choice, son, Tanner said. You cooperate or you don't cooperate, but if you want to play hardball, I have to call Jacko and Kumbi in. They'll rough you up a little, then they'll tie you down, and I'll get what I want anyway. You don't want that, do you? Make it easy on yourself. Alex knew there was no point in refusing, although it made him sick. He allowed Hannah and the nurse to give him a thorough examination. They checked his reflexes, propped his eyes, ears, and mouth, weighed and measured himself, and took the various samples. At last, they let him go. You've looked after yourself, Alex, Tanner said. For Pom, you're in great shape. He was obviously pleased. Your blood type is A positive, he added. That's going to be an easy match. It was as if he was putting his clothes back on that he did it. Tanner was typing something into his computer. The nurse was looking over his shoulder. Alex was pulling on his trainers, leaning against the trolley as if supporting himself. He allowed one hand to cover a scalpel, then slid it sideways and dropped it into his trouser pocket. He would have to walk very carefully, or he'd give himself a nasty cut. He just hoped nobody would notice what he had done. The nurse looked up and saw that he was dressed. I'll take you to your room, she volunteered. You should rest. We'll bring you supper in an hour. The sun had almost set. The sky was a deep grey with a streak of red like a fresh wound above the horizon. Just a quick thing about me, I'm 8. Just a quick thing about me. I am 8. I'm world champion martial arts. I play in the national championships in chess. I'm a very good chess player, you might say that. And I got tons of lovely friends that I like. One friend is my best friend that I hate so much. Starts with an, I can't say anything actually. I starts with an R. I'll just tell you, called Robert Potato. But then after that, it's all about that. I'm a boy, not a girl, and I'm 8. Right, let's carry on. The sun had almost set. The sky was a deep grey with a streak of fresh like wound above, like a streak of red like fresh wound above the horizon. It began to rain. 5 drops of water bursting one at a time on the ground. There's going to be another storm, the nurse said. I'd tuck up and have an early night if I were you, and remember, stay indoors. The dogs train not to come into the buildings. I mean, this is a medical facility. But we'll take one step outside and he'll go for you. And we don't want you we don't want you losing too much of that blood of yours, do we? Not at all. £500 a pint. She left Alex alone in a small room on the ground floor. It had a bed, a table, and a single fan rotating in the centre of the ceiling. In one corner there was a heavy silver filing cabinet. Alex opened it. There was nothing inside. A second door led into a small shower room which also contained a toilet and a sink. Alex slid the scalpel out of his pocket and hid it inside a hanging roll of toilet paper. He didn't know if he had any use for it, but at least it made him feel better having taken it. Maybe these people weren't quite as clever as they thought. He went back into the bedroom. A single window looked down to the lake, with the Piper Super Cub gone. Somehow Alex felt more abandoned than ever. He sat down on the bed and tried to collect his thoughts. Only the day before he had been in Darwin congratulating himself on what he had achieved, thinking his mission was over. And now this? How could he have been so stupid? He wondered what was happening to Ash. He still didn't understand why the two of them had been separated. If you knew that Ash was working for ASIS, why hadn't he sent him here too? Ash was filled with a longing to see his godfather again. It made everything even worse, being here alone. An hour later, the door opened and a second nurse came in carrying a tray. She was dark-haired and slim and would have been pretty, except that she had a rash over the lower part of her face. She was younger than Charlie, but equally welcoming. "I'm Isabel," she said. I'm going to be looking after you. I've got a room just past the stairs, halfway down the corridor, so if you need anything, just yell. She set the tray down. Alex's dinner consisted of steak and chips, fruit salad, and a glass of milk. The sight of the food sickened him. He knew they were only building him for what lay ahead. He noticed the 2 pills in the plastic cup. "What are these?" he asked. "Just something to help you sleep," Isabel replied. "Some of our patients have difficulty nodding off, especially the first couple of nights, and it's important you get your rest." She paused at the door. "You're the youngest we've ever had," she said, as if Alex wanted to know. "Leave the tray outside the door. I'll collect it later." Alex picked at the food. He wasn't hungry, but he knew he had to keep his strength up. Outside, the rain fell more heavily. It was the same tropical rain that he had experienced in Jakarta. He could hear it hammering on the veranda roof and splashing into even widening puddles. There was a flicker of lightning, and for a couple of seconds he saw the rainforests, black and impenetrable. It seemed to have moved closer, as if it were trying to swallow him up. Later, somehow, he couldn't sleep. He didn't take off any of his clothes. He couldn't bear to. He simply lay down on his bed and closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the first light of the morning was already slanting in. His clothes felt damp. His muscles ached. He lifted his wrist and examined the watch. The hands were still set at 11 o'clock. Almost 36 hours had passed since he had called for help. He listened to the world outside, the harsh cry of some sort of bird, the rustle of the grasshoppers, the last drip of water as it fell from the branches. There was nobody out there. MI6 hadn't arrived, and Alex couldn't fool himself any longer. Something had gone wrong. The watch wasn't working. They were never going to come. Chapter 18. Dead of the night. The following afternoon, the silence of the rainforest was punctured by the drone of the engine. The Piper Super Cub had returned. Now Alex had fallen into a strange mood as one he could barely understand. It was almost as if he had accepted his fate and could no longer find the strength or even the desire to escape it. He had met the two other women working at the hospital, Nurse Swain and Nurse Wilcox, who had proudly told him that she was going to be his anesthetist. Nobody had been unkind to him in a way. That was what made it so nightmarish. They were always checking that he had food in the water. And would he like something to read? Would he like to listen to some music? Soon the very sound of their voices made his skin crawl. He couldn't break free of the feeling that they owned him and always would. But he hadn't given up completely. He was still searching for a way out of this hideous trap. The river was impossible. The river was impossible. There were no boats, nothing. That would pass as a boat. He had followed the fence all the way round. There were no gaps, no convenient overhanging branches. He had considered blowing a hole in it. He still had one of the 3 coins that Smithers had given him, but the fence was connected to an electrical circuit. The guards would know instantly what he had done. And without a map or compass or machete, Alex doubted he would be able to find a way through the rainforest. He thought about sending a radio message. He had seen the radio room in the administration building, and it was neither locked nor guarded. He soon realized why. The radio transmitter was connected to a numeric keypad, yet a punch-in code to activate it. Major, you really had thought of everything. Alex watched as the plane hit the surface of the lake and began a slow, lazy turn towards the jetty. He had been expecting it. Dr. Tanner had told him he would be coming the first night before. "It's your first customer," he had said to Alex cheerfully. "A man called R.V. Weinberg. You may have heard of him. Unusual, Alex said nothing. He's a realty TV producer from Miami. Very successful, but he's contracted serious eye disease, and he needs 2 transplants. So it looks as if we'll be starting with your eyes. We'll operate first thing tomorrow morning." Alex examined the American from a distance, and it was helped out of the plane. Dr. Tanner had warned him not to approach or try to speak to the customer. It was one of the house rules. But looking at him, Alex found himself filled with more hatred than he ever had felt for any human being. Weinberg was overrated in a soft, flabby way. He had curling grey hair and a face that could have been made of putty, with sagging cheeks and jowls. He was a millionaire with sagging cheeks and jowls, which I don't know what jowls are. He was a millionaire, yet he dressed shabbily, his gut pressed against his Lacoste shirt. But it wasn't just his appearance that disgusted Alex. It was his selfishness. His complete lack of heart. Tomorrow Alex would be blind. This man would take his sight without thinking about it, simply because it was what he wanted, and he had the money to pay for it. Major, Dr. Tanner, and the nurses were evil in their own way. But Weinberg, the successful businessman from Miami, made him physically sick. Alex waited until man had disappeared into the house that had been prepared for him, then walked down to the edge of the lake. So this was it. He had just one night to make his escape. After that, it would be impossible. But the anger that Alex had felt had broken through his sense of hopelessness. He was ready to fight back. These people thought he was helpless. They thought they'd covered everything, but they hadn't. Noticing the missing scalpel, and there was something even more important that they've overlooked. This fact they were sitting right in front of them. The plane. The pilot had climbed out dragging a kit bag with him. He looked as if he was going to stay until Weinberg was ready to leave. Alex had no doubt that the piper would be incapacitated. The engine closed down and the keys locked away. And Dr. Tanner would be fairly certain that no 14-year-old boy knew how to fly. But that was his mistake. To leave the plane out and everything inside it, moored to the jetty, Alex examined it, working out the angles, thinking about what lay ahead. He might have found a way out. They sent Alex to bed at 8:30, and Nurse Isabel came into the room once he was tucked up. She was carrying 2 sleeping pills and a little cardboard cup of water. "I don't want to sleep," Alex said. I know, dear," Isabel replied, "but Dr. Tanner says you've got to get your rest." She held out the pills. "It's going to be a good big day for you tomorrow," she went on. "You need your sleep." Alex took the pill. Alex hesitated, then took the pills. He threw it into his mouth and swallowed the water. The nurse smiled at him. "It won't be too bad," she said. "You'll see." She put her hand to her mouth. "All right, you won't. All right, you won't." They checked Alex's room an hour later, and at 11, both times, they saw him lying utterly in bed. Dr. Tanner was surprised. He had been expecting Alex to try something. After all, Major Yu warned him to take extreme care with this particular boy, and tonight was his last chance. But it sometimes happened that way. It seemed that despite his reputation, Alex had accepted the hopelessness of the situation and chosen to find a brief escape in sleep. Even so, Dr. Tanner was a cautious man before he went to bed himself. He called the 2 girls, Quamby and Jacko, into his office. I want the 2 of you outside the boys' room all night," he ordered. The 2 men looked at each other in dismay. "That's crazy, boss," Jacko said. "The kid's been asleep. He's been asleep for hours. He can still wake up." So he wakes up. Where's he going to go?" Tanner rubbed his eyes. He'd like to get a good night's sleep before he operated, and he was in no mood for a lengthy bath. "I've got my orders from Major Yu," he snapped. "You want to argue with him?" He thought for a moment, then nodded. "All right, let's do it your way, Jacko. You take the first shift until 4 o'clock. Quamby, you take over then. Make sure the dog stays outside the whole time too. I want to be sure that no one goes anywhere tonight, okay?" 2 men nodded. "Good. I'll see you tomorrow." At 3:30 that night, Jacko was sitting on the veranda outside Alex's room, flickering through a magazine he had read 50 times before. He was in a bad mood. He had passed Alex's window at least a dozen times, listening out for the faintest sound. There had been nothing. It seemed Jacko that everyone had got themselves in a complete panic about this kid. What was so special about him? He was just one of the many who had just passed through the hospital. Some had screamed and cried. Some had tried to buy their way out. All of them had ended up the same way. The last 30 minutes of his guard duty ticked on by. He stood up and stretched. A few meters away, lying on the grass, Spike cocked near and growled. "It's all right, dog," Jacko said. "I'm going to bed. Quamby will be here soon." He belched, stretched a second time, and walked off into the darkness. 10 minutes later, Quamby took his place. He was the younger than the two of the men that had spent almost a third of his life in jail until Dr. Tanner had found him and brought him here. He liked his work at the hospital and enjoyed taunting the patients as they got weaker and weaker. But he was in a bad mood right now. He needed sleep and he didn't get paid overtime for working through the night. As he reached the building, his eye was caught by something glinting in the grass, just in front of the door. Some sort of Vorgine coin. Quamby didn't even wonder how it got there. Money was money. Wonder how he walked straight over and bent down to pick it up. He was faintly aware of something falling out of the sky, but he didn't look up quick enough to see it. The silver filing cabinet could have crushed him, but he was lucky. One corner struck him, a glancing blow on the side of his head. Even so, it was enough to knock him out instantly. Fortunately, the cabinet made a little sound as it thudded onto the soft grass. Quamby fell like an axed tree. The dog got up and whined. It knew that something was wrong, but it had never been trained for this. It went over and sniffed at the motionless figure, then sat on its hind legs and scratched. On the first floor balcony, Alex Ryder looked at his handiwork with grim satisfaction. He had been asleep. He had never been asleep. He had palmed the pill and swallowed only water. He had been waiting quietly ever since. He had got up several times in the night, in the one night, waiting for Jacko to leave, and he heard the words he had spoken to the dog. That was when he had got dressed and set to work, carrying the heavy filing cabinet up one flight of the stairs had been almost beyond him, and it was probably only desperation that had lent him strength, and he clutched it in both arms and balanced it on his knee. The worst part, he had to make sure the metal frame never banged against the wall or the wooden steps. Nurse Isabel had a room on the ground floor, halfway down the corridor. In the cabinet halfway down the corridor. The slightest sound might wake her up. He had dragged the cabinet into the room over the front door, and with one last effort, he had somehow managed to heave it onto the balcony rail, balancing it just while he fumbled in his pocket. It had only been time. Quamby had made his appearance a few seconds after Alex had dropped the 10-back coin that Smith had given him onto the lawn as bait. From that moment, the trap had been set, and it worked. Jacko was in bed from the sound of it. Nurse Isabel hadn't woken up. Quamby was unconscious. With a bit of luck, he might even have fractured his skull, and the dog hadn't spoiled it all by barking. The dog was next. And he crept back downstairs and went over to the main door. As he appeared, Spike began to growl, his hackles rising and an ugly brown eye glaring out of the darkness. But, like Dr. Tanner, Nurse Hicks had told him more than she should have. She said that the dog was trained not to come into the building. The animal was clearly lethal. Even for a pit bull, it was ugly. But it wouldn't harm him as long as he didn't step outside. "Nice dog," Alex muttered. He stretched out a hand. He was holding the piece of steak that had been given on the first night. It had been kind of Dr. Tanner to warn him that there was a dog. Cut into the meat were the 6 sleeping pills that he had been given over the last 3 days. The question was, would the dog take the bait? It didn't move, so Alex threw the meat onto the grass. Close, so sprawled out of the bodyguard. The animal ran over to it, its stomach tail back, and it looked down, sniffed, and scooped up the meat greedily, swallowing it without even chewing. Just as Alex had hoped. It took 10 minutes for the pills to take effect. Alex watched as the dog grew more and more lumpy until finally it collapsed on one side and lay still. Apart from the rise and fall of its stomach, at last things seemed to be going his way. Even so, he stepped outside cautiously, expecting either the dog or Crombie to wake up at any time. But he had no need to worry. He scooped up the coin. It was lying a few centimetres from the edge of the filing cabinet, and hurried into the night. There was a soft echo of thunder that trembled through the air like a drum rolling down a hill. It wasn't raining yet, but there was going to be another storm. Good, that was exactly what Alex wanted. He checked the left and right. The compound was kept permanently lit by a series of arc lamps. The rest of the hospital staff, the pilot and the American television producer would all be fast asleep. Alex hesitated just for a few seconds, thinking how wonderful it would be if MI6, perhaps Ben Daniels, and a platoon of SAS men chose this moment to make their appearance. But he knew that wasn't going to happen. It was all down to him. He hurried towards the jetty. If he only had learned how to fly, he might have been able to get the Piper started, and in minutes he would have been out of here, on his way to freedom. But at 14, and despite all the other skills his uncle had taught him, he had been too young to fly for flying lessons. Never mind, the plane was still going to be useful for him. For that was Dr. Tanner's big mistake. The security at the hospital had been thoroughly checked, but only when the Piper had been away. Right now he was back, and even though he couldn't fly it, the seaplane was still going to help him escape. Alex reached the jetty without being seen, and crouched in the shadow of the plane. It was still on its float, rocking gently in the water. There was now a loud rumble of thunder, loud as hammer, and a few drops of water splashed on his shoulders. The storm was going to break very soon. Alex examined the Piper Super Cub. There were two metal struts on each side, supporting the weight of the cockpit, where they were bolted into the long fiberglass floats. Just as he remembered, Alex reached in his pocket and took out the pen back coin again. It was the last one Smith had given him, and it occurred to him and if this weren't according to plan, all three would have saved his life. He placed it against the larger of the metal struts and looked up at the sky. There were a few stars tonight. The cloud line ahead behind them, the lightning flickered, white and mauve. Alex had the chewing gum packet in his hand. He waited for the thunder and pressed the switch at the exactly right moment. There was a small explosion. Even without the storm, it might not have been heard. But the coin had done its job. One of the struts had ripped apart. The other had come free from the float. The Piper sagged into the water. Alex lay down on the jetty and pressed his feet against the float, pushing with all his strength. Slowly, the float moved away from the main body of the plane. Alex pushed harder, and the float came free. The plane sagged uselessly in the water, moving more quickly now. Sagged in the water, moving more quickly now. Alex grabbed hold of the float and dragged it to the shore. What he had something almost exactly the same shape and the size as a kayak or a canoe. He had even managed to blow a hole into the top, which would allow his legs to fit inside. Immediately, the float had no foot braces, no thigh hooks, and flat that would make it stable in the water. But with more, it would be hard to control. But it was also way too much heavy. It was also too heavier. Kayaking in his life twice with his uncle. Alex had gone kayaking 3 times in his life. Twice with his uncle Iron Rider in Norwalk and Canada, and once in Wales with Brooklyn School. When he was doing his Duke of Edinburgh, I've been to Edinburgh before, Eddie was a ward. He'd had some experience of rapids, the pillows and eddies, the holes and the pour overs that made the journey so. Using experience of rapids, the pillows and eddies, the holes and the pores that made the journey such a white-knuckled ride. But the truth was, he had no expert. Far from it. All he could remember of his last trip was speed, screams, and exploding water. He had been 13 at the time and had thought himself lucky to come out alive. The scalpel was back in his pocket, wrapping in toilet paper. Excuse me, to prevent the blade cutting him. Now he took it out and unwrapped it, glad that he'd decided to take it from Dr. Tanner's office, being careful not to slip and slice open the palm of his hand. He cut away the jagged edges of the hole, trying to make a smooth line. He knew that the journey ahead was going to be tough, but he didn't want his stomach and hips to be cut to pieces. The blade was small but very sharp. Soon the float was ready, and he left off on the shoreline. Now he needed to paddle. That was the easy part. For all his smug jokes about coffin lids, Dr. Tanner had overlooked the obvious. The Piper Super Cub itself carried a paddle as part of its safety equipment. Alex had noticed it when he had flown in, clipped to the side wall of the cockpit. The pilot had used it to steer the plane ashore. Alex went back to the edge of the lake, where the plane seemed to have tilted even further below the surface of the water. Eventually it would sink. He found a piece of broken strut and twisted it in free. Now he had a makeshift crowbar. He waited for another roll of thunder, then used it to smash a window. Opening the passenger door from the inside, he reached in and took the paddle. Alex was tempted to get away underway at once, but he made himself wait. If the rapids were as bad as Tanner described, he couldn't possibly risk hitting them in the dark. He needed the first light of dawn. It was raining harder now, and Alex was soaked through, but in a way he was glad. The rain would provide him cover if anyone chanced to look outside. While he was on the wide section of the lake, he would be exposed. It would take him about 5 minutes of hard paddling to reach the cover of the rainforest. He needed a diversion, and suddenly it occurred to him that Piper could provide it. Once again, he worked out the various possibilities. He had at least another hour until he would have enough light to take it on the river. All he wanted to leave was his mark on Dr. Tanner, R.V. Weinberg, and this entire setup. I smiled grimly. These people were poisoned, but they'd been in control for too long. Now it was time to bite back. Bye everyone. Thank you for listening to this.